Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. What is going on, everybody? John Middlekauff, 3 and Out podcast. Hopefully everyone's having a great day. Wanted to dive in off the top about this conversation that's out there in the internet streets. Could the NBA guys play in the NFL, and could the NFL guys play in the NFL or in the NBA? Is it even possible? Is it a stupid argument? I have a couple takes when it comes to that conversation. Something that's, in sports talk world, between human beings, not even talking about podcast or YouTube, or I'm talking about a bar. I'm talking about sitting there when you're 15 years old with your friends. It's a conversation that's happened my entire life. Also, just some thoughts on some of these young quarterbacks. Watching the NBA playoffs and seeing Anthony Edwards become like a Kobe Bryant meets Michael Jordan. Who in the NFL, what young quarterback could kind of take on that role in these next couple of years? Did the 49ers send Deebo Samuel a message? Because sometimes messages are strong. Sometimes you do things, like sometimes things get out, I think, in sports that you don't want them out. And then sometimes things, quote unquote, get leaked for a reason to kind of send a message. This isn't okay. Times Pat Riley just says, yeah, he needs to shut up. If you watch that Miami Heat press conference, Pat Riley, it was classic. And then rookie minicamps, which are about to start. Just some thoughts overall and what they even mean. Can anything come out of it? And just the overall, what it's all about, the point of it all. Before we dive in to anything football-wise, I did want to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast. I was at the gym earlier today, and I looked up at the TV, and it was Phillies Blue Jays. It was a beautiful day. Beautiful, beautiful day in South Philadelphia. And the sun was out shining. I'm like, God, that'd be being at the game, having a hot dog, having a brewski, sitting with your buddies, enjoying yourself. Do you want to go to a baseball game this summer? Get outside. We all, as Rihanna would say, work, 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 work. That's all we do. And sometimes it's nice to let your hair down. I would if I could. And go do something. Friday night, Saturday night, Thursday night. Just enjoy yourself. Some balance in your life is very healthy. And I'm here to help you out. So just download that Gametime app. You can go to anything. Concerts, comedy shows, NBA playoff games, NHL playoff games, baseball games, college baseball games if you live in an area that has that. I got you covered. Just take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Austin Rivers, I would say, created a firestorm for former athletes, especially NFL guys, that I felt like were very, very offended. When he said that easily 30 guys in the NBA could play in the NFL tomorrow, and no one in the NFL could play in the NBA. And I would say the best conversation or take I saw of this was Chris Long posted some stuff. He was hot and bothered. And I think he talked to the root of why this conversation is so stupid. Now, I don't think anyone just in the NBA could just start playing in the NFL tomorrow, right? I think athletically, clearly, I was watching the Sixers with Tyreek Maxey. What an elite athlete. Or Jalen Brunson's body type. Obviously, athletically, these guys have the ability to be NFL athletes. Some of them are the best athletes in the world. No one argues that. But the culture of football and the culture of NBA in 2024, the gap couldn't be any wider. The NBA I grew up on in the 90s, young people loved to talk shit about it. It was much more enjoyable. Why? It had a football feel. Beside the best of the best, most guys were not on scholarship. There was an edge and a fight to the players because the contracts weren't nearly what they are right now. And you could be replaced at a moment's notice. And a lot like football, because in the 90s, just the rehab of injuries is nowhere near what it is now. Major injuries would derail your career and you're never the same and you're out of the league. But when I look at the NFL and just football in general, I'll never forget when I became a graduate assistant at Fresno State. And this was before the new CBA in 2011 and college football basically followed suit, and double days don't exist. For about 3 straight weeks at Fresno State, under Pat Hill, whose career really took off when he started working for Bill Belichick in Cleveland, because he was the assistant offensive line coach under Kirk Ferentz. He ran a very old school 1980s, 1990s operation. For 3 straight weeks, double days. In Fresno, California, in the summer, in August, 1, the air is awful, and 2, it's about 108 to 110 degrees. And I'll never forget, like the first couple days in pads, we ran inside run or 9-on-7, where you get 7 defenders, the 4 defensive linemen, and the 3 linebackers against 9 guys on offense. 1 obviously being the quarterback, and whether you put on a fullback there or a tight end, and the 5 offensive linemen. And it is just either off tackle or inside the guard or center runs. It is a drill that separates the men from the boys. And I just remember watching going, no wonder most people in high school can't make it to this level. 1, I mean, the size of these guys, even at Fresno State, and this ain't Alabama or USC, but the physicality, the speed, and the violence. And I was like, Jesus. And then when I got to the NFL, my first year was before they changed the rules. We did double days, what felt like at Lehigh under Andy Reid, for weeks, doing similar stuff. Inside run drills. I mean, one-on-one gauntlet-like tackling drills. It was goal line drills in training camp that were just felt like people were going to get KO'd. And there is a physical level to football that just isn't there in basketball, right? Hockey, football, the UFC, it is predicated on violence, on like legitimate violence. One guy hitting another guy at high rates of speed, or enormous human beings tackling guys much smaller than them. Then there's the element, and I thought Chris Long put this very well, whether you go to high school football, college football, or the NFL. If you go to a practice, these coaches are all over everyone's ass 24/7, 365, especially certain positions. The O-line, D-line, and just defensive guys in general are getting their ass ripped all the time. Just because you go to an NFL practice and guys are making millions of dollars, and I've been going to training camps for 15 years, how intense the coaching is. In the NBA, the culture, and it even starts in college now with some of these guys cycling out, the Coach K's and the Boeheims all retiring. Those days are done. Tom Izzo is the last of a dying breed. So culturally, the world we live in right now, these guys aren't used to what is mandated in the sport of, you're getting yelled at no matter what. I mean, the dynasty of my life was most notably known for Belichick could get on Tom no different than he could the practice squad guy. MFing him all day. That doesn't happen. If that happened in the NBA, the coach would be fired if he MF'd the wrong guy. So culturally, the shock would be to a 28-year-old making $28 million in the NBA could never handle that. It would not be allowed. It wouldn't fly. So that would be an impossible transition. And here's the other thing. In training camp, even now, there are no double days, but for a month straight, every single day, most guys are getting into the breakfast hall between 7 and 7:30. And you're not going back to your room, I don't know, depending on the team, till 9 at 10 at night. It is a day. In basketball, you show up for shoot around, you go home, you take a nap, and you come play another game. Training camps barely even exist anymore. They don't practice. The two sports, in terms of the way they're built, fundamentally couldn't be any more opposite. Now, just pure athleticism, there is no debate that guys in the NBA could play in the NFL. But as we've seen forever with the combine, just because you're a great athlete doesn't mean it translates to the sport. Here's the other thing. When I was working in radio in the Bay Area, I went to a lot of NBA games. I think people underestimate how enormous these individuals are. The average like shooting guard and wing in the NBA is like 6'6.5" to 6'9". Trent Williams is one of the biggest guys in the NFL. He's like 6'5". So the size component and the huge part of football is all about leverage, getting low. In the NBA, it's all about playing above the rim. So the sports are just dramatically different in terms of what is asked. But the physicality element, and Barkley has said this many times on television, went out for football one day, started getting hit nonstop, and he quit. So to think that these guys that are in the NBA that have never played football, obviously some of these guys that played high school football, could have played college football, and could have been NFL players. But once you get out of the culture of something, it's hard to get back into it. So I think it would be impossible for these guys to, because I think most of them would hate it and quit. Like, wait, my money's not guaranteed. You're screaming at me. Fuck this. I'm going back here where I do whatever I want, whenever I want. When I say jump, management and the coaches say how high. In the NFL, it's opposite. When Pat Riley went on this long diatribe the other day about Jimmy Butler, basically like, if he's not playing, he needs to shut up. Everyone in the NBA was like, I can't believe, oh my, because no one would say that. That's like a typical Monday after a game, week 3 for 17 NFL teams. So to me, the cultures are so much different, let alone what is asked of you physically. And then the weekly grind, like in the NBA, you just get to play. That's why anyone growing up playing basketball, whether you played in college, high school, whatever, you can play pickup, whatever. You just show up, hoop. The NFL is not a sport where you just show up and play football. You practice like 90% of the time. You spend countless hours in meetings, just watching film, learning, taking notes. I'm telling you, if they were two industries, one would be like tech and one would be like, I don't know, construction or something. They have nothing in common besides athletic people play the two sports. And I just think it was a stupid argument. If you think, yeah, could a guy just show up and play a game? If he put Tyrese Maxey out at wide receiver and have him run some go routes, sure. Could he play 17 games? What happens the first time he runs over the middle and someone tackles him hard? And I'm not acting like the guy's not tough, but there's a level of toughness and violence in football, college and pro, that has no similarities to the sport of basketball in 2024. None. Absolutely none. So I think this conversation is just, it's fun. It's enjoyable. We all make jokes about it. But the world the NBA is living in is a completely different universe that NFL players have to take on. And they're used to it. You get numb to it. It's like anyone that works in any industry, you get used to the quirks, the things you like, the things you don't like. But, it's probably not changing much. Like the NFL is never going to get to a point where O-line coaches aren't yelling at the offensive lineman, saying mean shit to them nonstop. Kind of lets it go off your back. The NBA used to be like that. The NBA I grew up on, coaches used to coach them hard. Phil Jackson was all over Michael Jordan's ass. That would never happen today. The moment you look at me funny or I think you're an idiot, you're fired. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. So this conversation, while fun, is kind of dumb. Because one, if you're an NBA player, you'd much rather play. And, if you could do both, what would you choose? You would play in the NBA. The average salary is $7 million. The overwhelming majority of just decent players get enormous second contracts. And the injury risk, which I've always thought was crazy because of how high these guys are jumping, is much lower. And you have much more power. There's less of you because, like the NFL, you split the revenue with the owners, but there's only 12, 15 guys a team. So that's why these guys get paid more money. Where the NFL, you're splitting the revenue up between 53 times 32. And obviously there's 2 less teams in the NBA. So this conversation to me, and any NFL guy thinking they can go and drop 30 points, I saw Micah Parsons, they're out of their mind as well. Because if you're 6'2", you're a midget in the NFL or in the NBA. You're tiny. Tiny. Jalen Brunson's small, right? He's 6 foot, 6'1". Size of the majority of guys at different positions in the NFL. Linebacker, corner, wide receiver, running backs, 6'1" or smaller. He's feels like one of the smallest guys in the NBA. I'm watching the OKC Thunder the other night. Every guy they had out there was like 6'6" to 6'9", and then they had Chet Holmgren, who's like 7'1". The size, Draymond Green actually is a very undersized player. He's like 6'5" and a half, 6'6". Klay Thompson is taller at 6'7". So I think we underestimate the size differences, and it's a fun combo, but kind of stupid. The NBA playoffs are heating up, and so is the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. With same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out as the NBA postseason winds down. And if you're new to DraftKings, you got to check this out. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN, that's code JOHN, for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Now, one guy who is just a remarkable athlete, and one point in time, I think he was one of the best high school football players in Georgia, and he's always said it was his first love, and it's why I like him, because he plays like a throwback, and that's Anthony Edwards. If you've watched any of the Timberwolves in these playoffs, he jumps off the screen like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. He is a remarkable talent / player, and clearly how much he cares, to me, resonates why I watch them play, because I don't care about the Timberwolves, but I enjoy young players who have a chance to be all-time greats, whose give a shit factor is really, really high. And I find him a fascinating watch. I mean, he jumps off the TV screen. And when you look at the NFL, they have an established group of kind of like the guys 27 to 30 years old right now who are star players. Mahomes, Lamar, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. I mean, these guys, if they stay healthy another 7-8 years, can carry the league, and the league's in good shape. But you would like a couple other young players to kind of join that mix. So when I look at who in the NFL has a chance to be the next Anthony Edwards, I think the group's pretty clear. Obviously, the number one guy you would pick if it's a first or second year player would be CJ Stroud. Historic season, blue chip guy, Ohio State, number 2 pick in the draft, comes to the league, kicks ass, and takes name. Now, of this group I'm about to list, he's probably the worst athlete, even though we've learned he's a much better athlete than we once thought. But his game is really more, he plays much more like an old school pocket quarterback than he does Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, which is fine. I mean, some of the best players in the history of the league play just like that. You don't need to run around to be a great player, but that's how he's going to play. So when you watch him, the purity of his game is kind of old school, which I enjoy. And if he just keeps doing what he did last year, he's going to be viewed as a guy that's basically a top 5 quarterback. And the Houston Texans are going to be a problem for a long time coming. These other 2 guys are just great unknowns. Because if you just, to me, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a hater. I'm kind of writing off Bryce Young. And I was someone who liked Bryce Young a lot. I would have taken Bryce Young over CJ Stroud. I get new information, my opinion changes. Like I thought one thing, you see another thing, like I'm out. I'm betting against that organization. I'm betting against a guy 5'9", $180. I'm just not into it. I watch CJ Stroud. He's big. He's got a big arm. He's on a good team. Like, he's going to be successful. I am just betting against some things are out of Bryce's control. And when you just see that size of a human playing in this sport, I give you no chance. So, I'm sorry. I was wrong. But Anthony Richardson is the opposite. He is why, despite his, I would say questionable is the wrong way to put it, just limited information coming out of Florida, people were still enamored with him. And as they got to know the guy, I saw a headline today from Quentin Nelson, who loves him. He's like, he's everything you want in a quarterback. His work ethic, how hard he rehabbed, what he's like in the building, how hard he's studying. When I hear things like that, I'm like, I'm in. Because as we've learned, that's the position. If you have the physical characteristics and you're all in on that, you got a chance. It doesn't mean you're going to be a great player, but you got a chance. And I've said this before. I said it to Colin probably a month ago, that the NFL network is clearly just canceling everything. They just show replays. And so the gym I go to has NFL Network on one of the TVs. It's just constant games. Like yesterday I looked up, it's the Bucs-Eagles game, which I don't even blame. If I ran the NFL Network, I would do the same thing. Why are we paying for all this stuff? Nobody's watching. Just replay the games. We'll get the same rating anyway. Who gives a shit? cable bundle's done. This network's probably done. Is NFL Network even going to be around in 5 years? I think that's a 50-50 proposition. But I was watching this Rams Colts game, and you're just like, holy moly. This guy physically is a different animal. Now, here's the thing CJ Stroud has proven. For 3 straight years, two at Ohio State and 1 in the NFL. When a game is being played and he's the quarterback, you expect him to be on the field. Until he proves us that he gets injured. Like, I'm not betting against him missing games. He's proven to be a very, very durable player. Anthony Richardson is not. So there are major question marks. Can he stay on the field? But there is no debating this guy's physical ability. And this guy's physical, characteristics and upside, even relative to CJ. I'm not saying he's going to be a better player than CJ, but he is more physically gifted. So if he ever does get it right, and I'm telling you, if you just YouTube him against the Rams, there were moments where you're like, God, he can get it right. Here's why, you're like, Middlekauff, you hate Bryce Young, but you like this guy? Well, yeah, let's look at the Colts. 1, I think their roster can go head-to-head with the Texans. 2, I think they have one of the more dynamic young coaches in the NFL. So it's like, wait, he's got a great young coach who's also the play caller, and he's got a really good roster? Like, that's kind of what I bet on. So to me, he's got a chance, because CJ's already kind of in the mix, that all of a sudden we're talking like Anthony Richardson, like, geez, Colts really got something. And then obviously, last but not least, would be Caleb Williams, because the hype's there. The weapons on offense are there. The physical skills are there. The name recognition is there. Like, he's much more famous than Anthony Richardson. You'd say, in a weird way, he's every bit as famous as CJ Stroud. So he already has the built-in, like Anthony Edwards, because of the diminishment of college basketball and the importance of the NBA draft. I mean, this year, the NBA draft, unless you're just a nerd, you're not going to know one name beside a couple guys that you watch from March Madness. In the NFL, we know all these guys. And Anthony Edwards didn't play at Duke or Kentucky. He went to Georgia, and their team wasn't any good. So to me, Caleb comes in with all the hype. I've watched basically every game he's played the last 2 years, at least bits and pieces of it. Might have turned off like the Notre Dame game in the second half this year, but very, very awesome, man. He's got a boatload of talent, and the weapons are all there. I mean, they drafted Rome Odunze in the top 10 to go with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. You signed Swift, you got Kmet, you got some good offensive linemen. It's all going to come down to the coordinator and him. There's still a lot to be learned about him. Nothing bad. And Albert Breer wrote this really good article about the Bears' pursuit of him, basically saying, like, when they went through the scouting process, a lot was like, one thing Ryan Pohl, he was at the Notre Dame game, which is probably the worst game Caleb's ever played in his career, and was blown away how he wasn't pouting, how he was with his teammates, how he was encouraging. And then one project they gave one of the scouts, in like February or March, was to call every coordinator he played the last couple of years and get their opinions on how they game plan for him. And they also gave other scouts, when you went to all-star games, asked teammates, guys that he had played with either at Oklahoma or at USC, about him. And everything came back. Obviously, the coordinators were like, yeah, we changed the whole game plan just for this guy. And every teammate said positive things. So everything I've read, and I've watched him talk, someone sent me an email. I guess the high school he went to is like a really, really impressive school from an academic standpoint. I'm pretty sure it's a Catholic high school. It's a very serious high school. Like, there's not much screwing around there. And you see that when you hear him talk in an interview setting. So I'm very bullish on this guy. I mean, I can't wait to watch these 3 guys play. Obviously, CJ already has built-in buzz, but Anthony Richardson, I think Colts are going to be pretty good. I've been thinking a lot, like, what teams am I going to pick the division? I think the Colts and the Texans are playoff teams. And I think the Bears, a little more unsure just because the head coach, but I think their offense is going to have some moments, even if they were to underachieve. And if they play up to their capability, like, they could be a 10-win team for sure. Like, why didn't I throw Jaden Daniels in there? Like, I wonder if it's going to be a little harder transition than we think. Like, I don't know. I'm not anti Jaden Daniels, but I could see, like, for a lot of guys, it's not just rookie of the year, I throw 28 touchdowns. Going to a team that's pretty bad, they got new coach. Cliff, everyone loves him. We'll see. That's all I'll say is we'll see. Drake May's not going to play. J.J. McCarthy's not going to play. Michael Penix isn't going to play. So a lot of these guys aren't even going to play. So to me, and I under no circumstances would I include Bryce under this conversation. eBay Motors is here for the ride. You know, the first car I ever got, I was 16 years old, and my grandpa gave me a ride. And like any young lad who got a car that, let's face it, would not have been my first choice, I had to touch it up a little bit. And we tinted out the windows. We added a big subwoofer to the back, and you could hear me from miles away coming home. My parents sure loved me for that one. So did my neighbors. But I think the key to any young person getting a car is to personalize a little bit, because you're probably not going to get your dream car. And as you get older, you kind of become a car person or you don't. But you definitely have preferences, right? Some of us like bigger cars. I know I do. I've only had big cars, SUVs. And there are certain non-negotiables. I like 3 rows of seats. Now, ideally, I don't have kids right now, so I take out that 3rd row of seat, and I like a big, I like a lot of trunk room. Some people, don't like SUVs, like smaller cars. I've never been that big since my high school car of tinting the windows. I don't care if you see me or not, but I know some people, like, the first thing they do is tint the windows. It's crazy. The older you get, I had to have the subwoofers. The subwoofer, I couldn't listen to music for 5 minutes with the subwoofer like I did when I was younger. But there is something very, very special about that first car. I don't care how many cars you get since, how much money you make to get sweeter cars. You never quite forget that first ride and some of the memorable moments that you had in it in your high school years. So with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Sometimes NFL teams leak things on purpose. Clearly, things get out with trades or during the draft that you don't want to get out. And then things leak that, like, I think we want this out. When I was at the Super Bowl, I went to cocktails with a buddy from the Chiefs. And we were at a bar having some drinks, just talking everything. Well, one thing we were talking a little bit about the game is like, we really like our chances with our DBs against Deebo. Obviously, Deebo behind the line of scrimmage running, he's a great player. But in terms of running routes, we don't think he's going to be able to get open. And what happened? Deebo couldn't get open. And I'm not anti-Deebo because I've seen him play live. He is one of the most unique players I've ever seen. I watched him carry the Niners on his back to the playoffs in 2021. And he's made huge plays over the last couple of years. But since he got the contract, he never has quite lived up to the hype. And part of when you pay a player, like, you can't expect that player to be any different than he's been. And he was never Mr. Marvin Harrison running routes. He's not Devontae Adams. That's not his game. But because of his coach and because of the offense, it worked. But sometimes the last thing that happens in a sports season, like the way you get swept in the NBA playoffs or the way you get bounced in the NFL, or think about the Chicago Bears. Maybe their decision was already made before that Week 17 game against the Packers. But if they were even on the fence, that game was the nail in the coffin for Justin Fields. I do wonder if Kyle Shanahan goes at the highest level, because we're at this point in time, it's not about winning playoff games, not about winning the division. It was like trying to beat the Chiefs, trying to beat the Ravens, trying to beat a team that we're going to see in the Super Bowl or the NFC Championship with an elite defense. Can this guy get open on a corner? And the answer is not really. He can't. I mean, it's not really his. He's always had some success against Jalen Ramsey, but the Chiefs game was pretty enlightening. And when it leaked that, like, hey, the 49ers took a took a receiver in the first round. Could they trade Ayuk or Deebo? Well, it turns out they don't want to trade Ayuk. Obviously, they don't want to pay him as much as probably he wants, but Ayuk is a player that can translate for 15 years. Runs routes, can go deep, can go short, can break tackles. It's just a very versatile wide receiver running routes. Deebo's not really. And I wonder if Kyle Shanahan was like, I'm tired of this crap. One, he's been banged up a lot. A couple years ago, he wasn't in shape. And then the biggest game, like, he's a non-factor. So when it leaked out that Deebo was on the trade block, one, they were never going to get enough to make it make sense to trade Deebo. Like, no one's offering pick 27 for Deebo Samuel this draft. But what if the 49ers, Kyle and John, wanted that out to be like, Deebo, you better fucking really bring it this year. Because if you don't, like, all these conversations about us cutting you or just trading you for not much after this year isn't fake. It's real. Look at the books. Your salary cap hit next year is like $28 million. So I do wonder if it was a little bit of a message, because when you look at the logistics of the trade, they would never have got enough to trade him. He still has value to them. But maybe they wanted him to know, like, this isn't really going to fly. Now, the problem is, okay, to like run more routes in practice, that's not really his thing. So, I mean, they're kind of in bed with this player. They had no choice but to pay him a couple years ago, and they kind of got to figure it out. And I also think that reflects why they took a route running wide receiver with the 31st pick in the NFL draft, because the guy that they're paying $20 million a year doesn't really do that. And last but not least, rookie minicamp. I remember talking to a coach 4 or 5 years ago. He was a wide receiver coach at the time. He's now a coordinator. And he was like, rookie minicamp was the biggest shit show I've ever seen. No one knew what was going on. We had guys that are not going to be in the NFL, playing guard and safety, and it is just a zoo. You really are just trying to find out, because you have a lot of undrafted free agents. You have a lot of tryout players, because you got to fill the roster, right? No veterans are there. Well, if you only had 6 draft picks and you only signed 10 undrafted free agents, you do the math. You can't run a practice with 16 people. You got to somehow find a way to get 30, 35 people there just to function. And no one knows the playbook. No one knows what's going on. Most of these guys, especially with draft picks, have been flying all over the country or out of shape. It's kind of a useless exercise. I truly believe that. Beside the mental spot, teaching your young guys the playbook. But in terms of anything to be gleaned from the field, beside just their physical size, I don't think there's much. If anything, the number one takeaway I would have as an executive would be, does the guy look the part? 1. And 2, no injuries. I don't want anyone pulling a hamstring, getting themselves hurt. So when we actually get the veterans and we're running real practices, those guys aren't able to go because they have a soft tissue injury. So there is going to be, and this is the world we live in, a ton of reporters at this thing because it's their job to go to these mini camps, hyping it up or downplaying it. Like, this guy looked terrible, he looks low. None of it matters. There has never been a practice in NFL history that matters less than rookie minicamp. It's impossible to matter less. Like, you could argue OTAs don't matter that much. They matter dramatically more than this experience. Again, no one knows what's going on beside the coaches. No one. That includes your first round pick, your undrafted free agent, heads on a swivel. It's a little intimidating. It's the first time you ever put on an NFL jersey. You're out there with, you name it, Mike Tomlin or Mike McCarthy, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. It's an intimidating spot. You're just trying to not screw up. Don't let the internet fool you that something is dire or something is great just because you see a post over the next 40 days. I'm not saying don't get excited, but it's more the negative. Anything you read negative, do not take seriously.